There's a roadside convenience store just off the old highway, not too far from my place. It's the only spot open 24/7 in this middle-of-nowhere town I call home. It's about a 25-minute drive, less if I'm heavy on the gas, which I usually am. For anyone used to city life, that's basically like having it around the corner. My sleep schedule's been wrecked beyond repair, so that store's seen me more than a few times in the dead of night. I like to think I'm the kind of face you forget 5 seconds after seeing, but it wouldn't shock me if the overnight clerks have started to recognize me. This all happened just last week, and every detail's still fresh in my head. It was a little after midnight. I was glued to my laptop, deep into a coding session. My brain works best between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., when the world's quiet and it feels like no one else exists. But the thing about those late-night bursts of productivity is that hunger hits out of nowhere and fast. By 2 a.m., my stomach was louder than my thoughts, so I decided to head out for something greasy and warm. The road leading to the store isn't a real highway. It's a lonely, cracked stretch that barely gets any traffic after sundown. The drive there was quiet, uneventful, almost peaceful. When I got there, I grabbed a sandwich order from the counter and started wandering the aisles while waiting. The caffeine I practically live on, mixed with the ADHD I've had all my life, makes standing still impossible. So I paced. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, by the line of refrigerators humming against the back wall, someone was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, perfectly still. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned my head away, blinked, then looked again. No mistake. Someone was really sitting there. The guy wasn't just sitting there anymore. He was studying the refrigerator, like it held something only he could see. I could barely make out anything beyond the brown coat and faded jeans he had on. I wanted to get a closer look, just enough to catch his face. So I circled a few aisles down, planning to loop around quick. I figured I'd glance at him, maybe confirm he was just a weirdo killing time, then move on. I turned the corner fast, and that's when he snapped his head toward me. It wasn't a casual look, either. It was violent. Like his neck didn't bend, it jerked. For a split second, I froze mid-step, forgetting why I was even there. And when I finally met his eyes, I knew immediately that something was off. His pupils were wide, unnaturally wide, and his lips were twitching like he was mumbling silently or maybe shivering, even though the store was warm. His whole body seemed locked in an unnatural position, as if he was halfway between sitting and trying to stand. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He just stared with this dull, hollow look, like his body was awake, but the rest of him had checked out. The stare lasted too long. I felt it in my spine. Eventually, I looked away, pretended to browse snacks, and walked back toward the counter. My sandwich still wasn't ready, but I couldn't help glancing back at that corner every few seconds. He never moved, never even blinked. When my order finally came up, I grabbed it and got out without saying a word. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was on something. Maybe just sleep-deprived like me. But as I turned out of the parking lot, something caught my eye, a shape darting across the asphalt. Running. I looked again. A man sprinting from the store toward the far end of the lot. Brown coat. Same guy. By the time I realized it, he was climbing into a truck. I didn't even want to think about what he was doing at 2 a.m. I just kept driving. The lights from the store faded behind me as I got back on the empty road. For a few minutes, everything was still. No cars, no signs of life, just the soft of my tires on asphalt. Then headlights in the rear view mirror. At first, I thought it was a police car. The lights were closing in fast. I eased off the gas, ready for the worst. But when the truck finally got close enough, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a cop. It was him. That same truck from the parking lot. I floored it. My sedan wasn't built for this kind of speed, but I pushed it anyway. The headlights behind me flared brighter, swerving, flashing, honking. He was right on me, too close. I thought maybe he was trying to scare me off. Then the truck rammed my bumper. The impact jolted through my whole body. My hands tightened on the wheel. He rammed me again. I was going over 90 now, terrified, adrenaline burning through my chest. I tried slowing down to pull over. Maybe he'd pass me, but the moment I eased off the gas, he lunged forward again. I swerved, barely holding control. Then, out of pure panic, I jerked the wheel left and slammed the brakes. The truck shot past, fishtailing wildly before spinning off the road and into the dirt. I didn't look back. I didn't even breathe until I was miles away. When I finally reached home, I called the police, told them everything, the store, the guy, the chase. They took my statement, said they'd review the cameras. That was a week ago. Haven't heard a word since. My car's still scratched up, but I don't care. I just pray I never see that man again. I wasn't completely defenseless that night. I kept a small pistol holstered under my steering column. Something the company never officially approved, but considering some of the remote areas we delivered to, it felt more like survival than rebellion. When I slowed and rolled the passenger window down an inch, the woman rushed over immediately. She looked to be around my age, maybe a little older, and she tugged at the locked door handle before blurting out that she needed a ride to the next gas station. Her car, she said, had broken down, and no one was answering her calls. Her voice was shaky, not panic exactly, but uneven, like someone running on adrenaline or nerves. I hesitated. Something about her didn't sit right, but with a gun within reach, I figured I could handle myself if things went bad. So I unlocked the door. She climbed in fast, murmured a quick, "Thank you," without ever making eye contact, and folded her hands in her lap. Her words came out a little slurred, which made me wonder if she'd been drinking. Before pulling away, I asked the usual stuff. Did her car overheat, or did she hit something? But she dodged every question, just kept whispering, "Please, let's go." The unease built up in my gut. I was seconds away from telling her to get out when I glanced back at her car one more time. That's when a man stepped out from behind it. He hadn't been there a second ago. He was just standing, almost blending into the shadows. My stomach dropped. I turned forward, gripping the wheel, and that's when I noticed another figure standing in the road about 50 feet ahead. Something long in his hands, maybe a metal pipe or a bat. He started walking toward us. That was enough. I hit the gas so hard the tires screamed. The woman whipped her head back and started shouting, twisting in her seat. Then she bent forward, digging through her bag for something. That's when my instincts kicked in. I pulled my gun, holding it steady on the steering wheel where she could see it. "Don't," I told her. And just like that, she froze. Her hand stopped moving, and she stared forward with this blank, unreadable expression. She didn't say another word the entire ride. About half an hour later, I pulled into a small gas stop near Artesia. 2 semis were parked under the lights. I told her to get out. She refused. Said something I can't even remember now. My patience broke. I reached over, yanked the door open, and pushed her out. She stumbled, screamed something incoherent, and fell onto the pavement. One of the truckers started running toward us. To him, it probably looked like I was attacking her. I shouted something, maybe a warning, maybe an explanation, then slammed the truck in gear and drove off before he could reach me. At the next stop, I checked the seat she'd been sitting in. Between the cushions, I found a phone battery and a small zip-seal bag containing a handful of cable ties. I threw both in the trash and got back on the road. I didn't tell the cops. Didn't tell my company. Not because I didn't think it was serious, but because explaining why I was armed and why I'd physically kicked someone out of my truck wasn't something I wanted to do. Still, I'm pretty sure that decision, keeping that gun close, might have saved my life. This happened about 3 years ago. My husband and I were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia, a long trip, but we'd planned to stop by a few places he'd always want to see. It was all going great until that stretch through western Kansas along Route 400, 100 miles of nothing but black fields and silence. I'd fallen asleep around sunset, and when I woke up, the car was slowing down. My husband had pulled into a tiny roadside gas station, the kind with one flickering light and a single pump. He said he was getting snacks and topping off a tank. I figured it was my last chance to use a real restroom before the next few hours of nothingness. So I went inside. Didn't even bring my phone. I was just running in and out. The cashier barely looked up when I walked in, an older man with tired eyes. The bathrooms were tucked down a narrow hallway. As I pushed open the door to the women's restroom, I nearly collided with someone walking out. She was odd, stringy gray hair that looked damp, maybe greasy. A thick, ragged purple and green coat clung to her body, completely out of place for Kansas in midsummer heat. She wore old foam flip-flops that made wet slapping sounds with each step. And when she passed me, the smell, sour, chemical, and heavy, lingered long after she left the room. She was holding a tied-up plastic grocery bag, the thin handle stretched white from tension. When she saw me, she just froze, not like someone caught off guard, but like she'd been waiting for something. Her eyes locked on me with a strange, expectant focus, as if she was silently daring me to make the first move. I muttered a quiet, "Sorry, excuse me," and tried to edge around her, but she didn't budge. There was a half-second where I thought she might actually say something, but she didn't. She just pivoted slightly, like she was blocking the way. I figured that was it. Weird moment, sure, but I'd get through it and go about my night. Only she didn't leave. When I moved toward the sinks, she turned too, stepping closer, standing beside me but not doing anything. No washing her hands, no looking in the mirror, just standing, arms hanging loose at her sides, watching. That's when the unease really set in. I backed toward the stalls and locked myself in one, my heart thudding so loud it echoed in my ears. I instantly regretted not bringing my phone. There was no way to contact my husband if something went wrong. For a while, I just sat there listening. After what felt like several minutes, I heard the slow shuffle of her flip-flops toward the exit, then the squeak of the heavy door opening and slamming shut. Relief washed over me, until I realized something was off. I could still hear breathing. Not mine, someone else's. Soft, shallow, and close. It dawned on me that she hadn't actually left, she pretended to. She must have cracked the door open and slammed it just to trick me into thinking she was gone. I froze. I didn't even dare to adjust my breathing, terrified she'd hear. Then the door opened again, closed again. The breathing stopped. I waited, counting silently in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2, 3, nothing. Just as I was about to unlock the stall, I heard a sharp, quick inhale, like someone gasping after holding their breath. And then the door creaked and slammed once more. That's when real panic hit. She'd done it again. Twice now. Maybe even 3 times. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal curiosity. It was deliberate. A game. Finally, my nerves snapped. I couldn't stand it anymore. I unlatched the door and stepped out. The bathroom was empty. I washed my hands fast, my eyes darting toward the corners and under the stalls. Every flicker of light from the buzzing ceiling made me jump. When I walked out into the store, I spotted a man by the counter paying for his things. I lingered near a rack of chips, pretending to browse until he finished. When he started toward the door, I followed a few steps behind, just in case she was waiting outside. And she stood by the side of the entrance, partly hidden in shadow, clutching something small and glinting in her hand. I couldn't tell it was a knife or just metal packaging, but the way she crouched slightly, tense like a coiled spring, made my skin crawl. Before I could react, she turned and disappeared behind the building. I bolted for our car. My husband looked startled when I climbed in, breathing hard, and asked what took me so long. I told him everything once we were back on the road. He got upset, mostly because I hadn't brought my phone, but we both agreed not to stop again until daylight. When I glanced back as we pulled away, she was there, standing right at the corner of the building, watching us drive off. That was 3 years ago, and I still can't bring myself to use roadside restrooms after. This next story took place later that same year, 2020. I was 24, working for a small freight company that moved auto parts between cities in the Midwest. It was decent money and quiet work. Just me, the highway, and occasional podcast keep from falling asleep. It was late January, bitterly cold, the kind of night where the air feels sharp in your lungs and the stars look unnaturally close. I was driving east along I-80 from Des Moines to Davenport, about a 3.5-hour haul. I'd left around 8, and by 10:30 I was deep in the dark middle of nowhere. The only sound were my tires and the occasional roar of a passing semi. My eyes started to blur, my head heavy, so I decided to pull off when I saw one of those blue rest area signs flash by. The place was deserted, just a few dim lights, a squat brick restroom building, and an old white van parked to the far end of the lot. Engine off, no movement. I parked close to the lights, locked up, and went inside. The men's room smelled like cleaner and mildew, the air thick with that heat dryer smell of old vents. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the fatigue. That's when I heard it, the soft creak of the door behind me. I spun around. Nothing. No footsteps, no shadows. Just a humming of the heater and the faint rattle of a loose vent. I tried to laugh it off, figure it was just the wind or the pressure change in the heater kicking in. But when I turned back to the mirror, something caught my attention. In the reflection, the stall behind me wasn't empty anymore. The white van's headlights flicked on. The engine wasn't running, just the lights, glowing too bright in the still parking lot. I froze for a second, trying to remember if I'd heard an ignition. I hadn't. That bad gut feeling hit instantly, like ice down my spine. I unlocked my truck fast, climbed in, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, breaking the silence. I backed out quick and aimed toward the exit. Right then, the van's lights shut off again. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe someone inside had bumped the switch. Maybe they were sleeping. But as I got back on the highway, I kept checking my mirrors. For a few minutes, nothing, just empty road and headlights far behind. Then I saw it, 2 white dots closing in fast. The van. At first, I told myself it wasn't the same one. But as it crept closer, I recognized the shape. Boxy, dented, no side windows, no company logo, just a plain, filthy cargo van. It sped up and glued itself to my bumper. I was already pushing 75, but it stayed right there, so close I could see the reflection of its headlights bouncing off my tailgate. Then it drifted into the next lane, pulling up beside me. The driver rolled his window halfway down. I could barely make out his face, just a dark outline, and what looked like a baseball cap. He motioned for me to roll my window down. I didn't. He kept gesturing, then pointed at the back of my truck, like he was trying to warn me about something. For a second, I almost believed him. Maybe I'd lost a strap or something had fallen off, but my truck bed was completely empty. That's when it hit me. He wasn't trying to help. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pretended not to see him. But then the van started honking, sharp, angry blasts, and edged closer to my lane. I swerved a little to keep distance. The van sped up, cut right in front of me, and for a moment, I thought he was going to slam on the brakes. Instead, he veered hard onto the shoulder and came to a dead stop. I flew past him, heart hammering, and stayed in the fast lane, doing nearly 90. When I finally looked in the mirror, he was back on the road. He followed. Sometimes he'd fade back until I couldn't see the headlights. Then, out of nowhere, they'd surge forward again, always too close, always in view. That's when I decided I needed to stop somewhere with people. The next sign said, "Truck stop 5 miles." I took the exit as soon as I saw it. I parked under the biggest light I could find, near the diesel pumps, where a few semis were idling. Through the diner windows, I could see drivers eating, laughing. Normal. The van didn't pull in right away. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Then it came slowly up the ramp. It parked across the lot, engine humming, facing directly toward my truck. I got out and walked straight into the diner. The bell above the door jingled, and the woman behind the counter, mid-50s, kind face, looked up. I told her a van had been following me for nearly half an hour. She must have seen how shaken I was, because she called over a trucker sitting at the counter. Big guy, gray beard, plaid shirt. He stood and said, "Show me." We stepped outside. The van was still there, idling, headlights cutting across the lot. He muttered, "Yeah, that's not good," and told him to stay put. Then he walked straight toward it. I couldn't hear what he said, but a few seconds later, the van reversed fast, swung around, and sped off toward the highway. When the trucker came back, he shook his head. 2 guys in there, he said, both wearing hoodies. Didn't say a word, just stared. I stayed in that diner almost an hour before I finally left. When I got back to Davenport, I parked under the hotel lights. My truck looked fine, except for 2 muddy handprints smeared on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it. I quit that job a few months later. Now, whenever I drive long distances, I gas up before dark, pack food, and only stop where there are crowds and bright lights. Because I know one thing for sure, if I had rolled that window down, or pulled over when they told me to, I wouldn't be here telling you this story.